In today's episode, we are going to talk about the most important piece of evidence, in fact, the only evidence in the state's case linking Richard Allen to these murders. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. This is Crafting and Crime Daily. I'm your host, Rebecca, and I recap live trials. Only this one's not live. You're not going to find this on YouTube or anywhere else. There's no cameras in the courtroom. Richard Allen, also known as the Delphi murder cases, is on trial for the murders of Abby Williams and Libby German, 13 and 14 years old. They went hiking on the Monon High Bridge Trail and never returned home. They were found dead the next day. Their throats had been slashed, one this way or this way, the other one vertically. So weird. Anyway, he's on trial. Today we're going to talk about what links him, Richard Allen, to these murders. The state's entire case rests on what I'm going to tell you today. So, Melissa Oberg, she is a firearms examiner. She took the stand. So she starts out by showing, they show two pictures to the jury. One is a bullet that she fired through Richard Allen's gun. The other one is the unspent bullet that they found at the crime scene. Now, she was asked later on cross-examination, what's the significance of these pictures? And she says, well, it captures something for her to remember these bullets by. So it has no relevance. I don't know why they showed it, because you can't see that one matches the other. They're two different things. Anyway, so like the high level opinion that this woman had, and we're going to talk about the basis of that opinion, is that the bullet found at the murder scene between the two girls' bodies, and I'll just back up for a second and tell you how that was found. It was buried like down into the ground, covered by leaves, and it was only discovered when the police were using this blue light, and they put goggles on to find blood splatter. But one of the officers did not have the goggles on. So while the blue light was on and he had no goggles, he sees something twinkling, sparkling, and that's how they found the bullet. Between the feet of the girls, and the girls were strategically placed, kind of like in a V, and they're both of their feet at the bottom, heads at the top, about 6 feet apart. So, but that bullet was an unspent bullet. In other words, the cartridge was there, the casing was there, the bullet was there, the whole thing was there, had not been fired. But in this woman's opinion, this bullet had been cycled through Richard Allen's Sig Sauer P226 weapon that was seized from his home. Now, I will tell you that she goes about and she's explaining to the jury that different parts of the guns leave marks. And if you put a bullet in and then you rack your gun and that bullet goes into the chamber, it will put marks on that bullet. You don't have to fire the bullet to get those marks. Okay. So what she does is she goes into her lab and she puts in an unspent bullet and cannot recreate the marks that she's seeing on Richard Allen's guns. So she decides, oh, I need more pressure. So she fires the gun. Then she takes the bullet that she has fired and compares that to the unspent bullet and says, they're the same. It matches. What? I'm not a gun aficionado by any means, but that makes no sense to me. Now, she said that you'll have the same marks on a spent casing and an unspent casing. I'm just reading through my notes. I mean, to my knowledge, when a bullet is fired, it expands, and that's, and the bullet comes out, the cartridge expands, and the bullet. I could be totally wrong, but and I'm sure someone will correct me if I'm wrong. How are the markings going to be the same? Here's the other thing. She testified that this gun over time and continued use will have different markings. She tested this thing 5 years after the murders. Okay. So there is evidence that this whole matching of the bullets is junk science. There's authority out there that says it's just not to be believed, that it's subjective. She testified that there's sufficient evidence to support. Well, the sufficient evidence is according to her. There's no standard to compare that to. Like when you see fingerprint or DNA, you have to have 23 markers that match. It used to be 17 or 19, and then it went up to 21, then 23. There's nothing standard about how they do this. And the defense is going to have an expert come on and testify about how this is junk science, but the judge excluded him as a witness. Now they are going to have a firearms examiner come on and take the stand during their case. So this woman testified she has never made a mistake. In all of her proficiency testimony over 17 years, she's always gotten it right. Okay. So one of the other things that she did was they gave her several other weapons. One of the weapons came from the Weber home, which was if you go down the hill, there's an access road that leads to the Weber home, and they took possession of his handgun. And so she tested that, and the results were inconclusive. She couldn't rule it in, she couldn't rule it out as being the weapon, but he was not arrested. There was some other guns found on the Logan property. Now, Logan property is where the girls were found. A lot of this area around the Monon High Bridge Trails belongs to a family called Logan, or at least it used to. I don't know if it still is at the time. And what they did was they fished a couple of guns out of the creek. They skimmed the creek. They found a couple of handguns, and they tested those. So now you've got wet handguns, and those were also inconclusive. Couldn't rule them in, couldn't rule them out. So here's how she justifies this. She says, had I seen Richard Allen's gun and the way that it matched this unspent casing, I would have ruled those as not the weapon. She would have changed her mind. I thought you got it all right all the time. And then she was asked, is this as good as paternity testing? And she's like, no. Paternity testing is pretty accurate. No, it's not like paternity testing. 1.5% of the time you'll get a false positive, and 2.7% of the time you'll get a false negative. And we're going to send someone to prison over this junk science? Are you serious? Yeah, no. I don't think so. Okay. I'm just reading over my notes. They actually showed to the jury a video of how this gun is manufactured. And it's basically an assembly line. So how many Sig Sauers were assembled that might make the same tool markings? I don't know. How can they all be different? I mean, we're not talking about DNA here or fingerprints. These are guns that are manufactured on an assembly line. And she's like, well, but different pieces to the gun are put together by hand. Okay, if you say so. I'm just reading through everything. Okay, so the last thing I wanted to say about this is that the jury seemed to be paying very, very close attention to this testimony. They asked 12 questions when it was over, and most of those questions were quite technical. I don't know what all the questions were, but one of them was, can you tell if this bullet came from the same lot as the bullet that was found in Richard Allen's home? In other words, the bullet on the crime scene, which was a Winchester 40 caliber hollow point, was the same as the Winchester 40 caliber hollow point that was found in the keepsake box in Richard Allen's home. You cannot say that those both came out of the same box because they're not identified on the bullet. There's no, on the cartridge, there's no lot numbers or anything like that. So she could not say that. Then one of the jurors asked, could disassembling and cleaning the weapon change some of those marks? Yes, it can. Now we're talking 5 years. Also, firing the weapon over time. So in that 5 years, if he fired the weapon, it could have changed. And if he disassembled and cleaned it, it could have changed. And probably made more markings. So how are the markings at the crime scene the same as 5 years later? Doesn't make sense to me at all. And we'll learn that, Richard Allen said he didn't carry a gun with him that day. Yeah. So the audience that was during all this, because it was very technical, people were getting bored. What, maybe not bored, but burnt out. They were leaving the courtroom. Jury's like looking up at the ceiling, because this is really dry testimony. And she was on the stand all day long. So let me just see, because I had so many detailed notes about this. So what does it mean to cycle? I think I might have explained this already, but I'll say it again. What does it mean to cycle a cartridge through a gun? It just means that it went into the chamber of the gun. So when you cock the weapon, that bullet will go up into the chamber. You don't have to fire it for it to get marks on it. And you cock it again and you take the bullet out. So it was never fired. The one found at the crime scene. So leave me a comment. Let me know what you think of this testimony. How are we trying Richard Allen for these murders? This is the state's only evidence. No DNA, no digital evidence. We don't have a license plate on the vehicle that they saw. Are we going to send this man to prison for these 2 murders on junk science? Let me know what you think in the comments. And don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. I have one more video to do to get you guys caught up, and it's a very interesting one. We're going to go into the second interview done by the Indiana State Police, Jerry Hallman, and the technique that he uses is really, really interesting. So I'll see you in the next episode. Take care.